The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the Nebraska prairie that August afternoon in 1878, turning the endless sea of grass into waves of shimmering gold. And Daniel Quinn figured he would die alone out here, just like he had lived for the past 5 years since the war ended and took everything from him. He rode his bay gelding through the rolling hills with nothing but the creak of leather and the whisper of wind for company, checking fence lines on the sprawling ranch where he worked as foreman, when he spotted something that made him rein in hard enough that his horse tossed its head in protest. A figure stumbled through the tall grass about 200 yards out, moving in erratic circles like a ship without a rudder. Daniel squinted against the glare, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle in his saddle scabbard, but something in the way the person moved made him pause. Not threatening, desperate. He touched his heels to his horse's flanks and cantered closer, the prairie grass parting before him like water. As he approached, he could see it was a woman in a dusty blue traveling dress that had seen better days, her dark hair hanging loose and tangled down her back. She spun around at the sound of hoofbeats, her face sunburned and streaked with dried tears, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. When their eyes met, he saw fear flash across her features, but also a flicker of hope that damn near broke something in his chest. "Please," she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Please help me. I have been walking for 2 days. The stagecoach overturned and everyone scattered and I do not know where I am." Daniel was off his horse before he fully realized he had dismounted, his canteen already in his hands. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He did not talk much these days, preferring the company of cattle and sky to people and their complications. "Drink slow or you will make yourself sick." She grabbed the canteen with trembling hands and gulped the water so fast that he had to pull it away gently. "I said slow," he repeated, but his tone was kind. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with striking green eyes that held intelligence even through the haze of exhaustion. Dirt smudged her cheek and her dress was torn at the hem, revealing scuffed boots that had never been meant for prairie walking. "Thank you," she whispered, and then her knees buckled. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground, surprised by how light she felt in his arms, how right it felt to hold someone after so many years of self-imposed isolation. He could feel her heart racing against his chest like a trapped bird. "I have got you," he said, and carried her to his horse. The gelding, used to his quiet rider, shifted nervously at the additional person but settled when Daniel spoke to him in low, soothing tones. "We need to get you out of this sun. There is a line shack about 3 miles north. Can you ride?" She nodded, though Daniel was not convinced she could stay conscious that long. He mounted first, then pulled her up in front of him, settling her against his chest. She fit there like she had been made for that exact spot, and Daniel tried not to think about how long it had been since he had held a woman, since he had wanted to. "What is your name?" he asked as he turned his horse north, keeping one arm firmly around her waist to keep her steady. "Beatrice," she murmured, her head lolling back against his shoulder. "Beatrice Patterson. I was traveling to Jerome Junction to meet my cousin. She married a shopkeeper there and offered me a position helping in the store. I came all the way from Philadelphia." Daniel knew Jerome Junction well. It was the nearest town to the ranch, a bustling little settlement that had sprung up along the railroad line about 15 years back. It was a good 30 miles east of their current position, which meant she had been walking in completely the wrong direction. If he had not found her when he did, she would have been dead in another day, maybe less. "You are safe now," he said, and meant it with a fierceness that surprised him. "I am Daniel Quinn. I work as foreman on the Triple Cross Ranch." I will get you to Jerome Junction, but first we need to get some food in you and let you rest." "The stagecoach," she said weakly. "It hit a rut and the driver lost control. We went over on our side. I think the driver was hurt badly. There was so much blood. Everyone was screaming and running, and I just started walking. I thought I was heading towards civilization, but everything looks the same out here. Just grass and sky and more grass." "The prairie can be deceiving," Daniel agreed. "Even men who have lived here their whole lives can get turned around if they are not careful. You are from the city, Philadelphia born and raised," she confirmed. "I have never seen so much open space in my life. It is beautiful but terrifying." Daniel looked out at the land he had called home for the past decade and tried to see it through her eyes. The endless rolling hills, the big sky that went on forever, the isolation that could crush a person or set them free depending on their nature. He had found freedom here after the war, a place where he could outrun his ghosts, or at least keep them at a distance. The line shack appeared on the horizon, a small wooden structure that provided shelter for ranch hands working the far reaches of the property. Daniel guided his horse up to the door and dismounted, then carefully lifted Beatrice down. She swayed on her feet, and he kept his hands on her waist until he was sure she would not fall. "Not much," he said, pushing open the door, "but it is out of the sun and there should be some supplies." The interior was sparse but clean. A single bunk, a potbelly stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with canned goods and coffee. Daniel guided Beatrice to the bunk and she sank down gratefully. He moved efficiently, starting a fire in the stove despite the heat because he wanted to make coffee and heat some beans. She needed food more than comfort right now. "I must look a fright," Beatrice said, touching her tangled hair self-consciously. Daniel glanced over at her and felt something shift in his chest again, that same unsettling sensation from before. "You look like someone who survived something most people would not have. That is nothing to be ashamed of." She gave him a tired smile that transformed her dusty, sun-damaged face into something luminous. "You are kind." "I am practical," he corrected, but he felt his ears grow warm. He was not used to compliments, was not used to conversation at all really. The other ranch hands knew to give him space, and he preferred it that way. Or at least he had thought he preferred it that way until about 30 minutes ago when he had spotted a desperate woman stumbling through the prairie and felt something wake up inside him that he thought had died at Shiloh. He brought her coffee first, strong and black, and she wrapped her hands around the tin cup like it was precious. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said, surprising himself. He was not usually one for small talk, but he found he wanted to hear her voice, wanted to know about her life before the prairie had tried to swallow her whole. Beatrice took a sip of coffee and winced at the bitterness but drank it anyway. "It is crowded and noisy, and the air always smells like coal smoke and horse droppings. The buildings are so tall they block out the sun, but it is also magical in its own way. There are theaters and museums and libraries bigger than this entire line shack. I worked as a seamstress in a dress shop on Market Street. The pay was poor and the hours were long, but I was good at it." "Why leave then?" Daniel asked, stirring the beans heating on the stove. A shadow crossed her face. "My father died 6 months ago. He was a dock worker and got crushed when a load of cargo shifted. My mother passed when I was 12. I had no other family in Philadelphia except an aunt who made it clear she would not support me now that father was gone. When my cousin Margaret wrote offering me a position, it seemed like providence, a fresh start in a new place." "I understand something about fresh starts," Daniel said quietly. He dished up the beans onto 2 tin plates and brought them to the table, along with some hardtack that had seen better days, but was still edible if you soaked it in the bean juice. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Daniel watched her from under the brim of his hat, noting how she savored each bite like it was a feast instead of basic trail rations. She had grace about her, even exhausted and disheveled. It was in the way she held herself, the way her hands moved. He found himself wondering what she would look like cleaned up, rested, wearing something pretty instead of that torn traveling dress. "What about you?" she asked suddenly, meeting his eyes across the table. "What brings a man out to the middle of nowhere to work a ranch?" Daniel took a long drink of coffee to buy himself time. He did not talk about the war, about what he had seen and done, about the friends he had buried and the innocence he had lost. But something about Beatrice's open expression made him want to try. "I fought for the Union," he said finally. "Joined up when I was 18, full of patriotic fervor and righteousness. Thought I was going to save the country. Instead, I learned that war is just organized slaughter dressed up in flags and noble words. When it was over, I could not go back to Ohio, could not stomach the idea of being around people who had not seen what I had seen. So I headed west and kept riding until I found a place empty enough to match how I felt inside." He expected pity or worse, that particular kind of reverence people sometimes showed veterans, treating them like heroes when most of them felt like anything but. Instead, Beatrice just nodded slowly. "My father fought too," she said. "He never talked about it much, but sometimes he would wake up screaming. Mother would hold him until the shaking stopped. I was too young to understand then, but I think I do now. Some wounds are not visible." "No," Daniel agreed. "They are not." They finished eating, and Daniel insisted Beatrice lie down on the bunk and sleep. She protested weakly, saying she did not want to be a burden, but exhaustion won out. She was asleep almost before her head hit the thin pillow, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of someone who had pushed themselves far beyond their limits. Daniel sat at the table and watched her sleep, which he knew was probably inappropriate, but he could not seem to help himself. There was something about her that called to him, that made the walls he had built around himself over the past 13 years seem suddenly flimsy and unnecessary. He had been alone for so long by choice, convinced that he was better off that way, that he had nothing to offer anyone after what the war had taken from him. But now, sitting in this small line shack with the afternoon sun slanting through the single window, listening to Beatrice breathe, he wondered if maybe he had been wrong. She slept for 3 hours while Daniel kept watch, stepping outside periodically to check on his horse and scan the horizon. The prairie stretched out in all directions, peaceful and deadly in equal measure. He thought about the stagecoach accident she had described, wondered if anyone else had survived, if they were out there somewhere still wandering. When he got Beatrice to Jerome Junction, he would make sure the sheriff knew to send out a search party. When she finally woke, the worst of the afternoon heat had passed, and the light was turning golden. She sat up slowly, blinking in confusion before remembering where she was. Her eyes found Daniel standing by the window and she relaxed. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice husky from rest. "A few hours. How do you feel?" "Better. Thirsty still, but better." She stood and stretched, wincing at stiff muscles. "Thank you for letting me rest." "I know you probably have work you should be doing." Daniel shrugged. "The cattle can wait. Getting you safe is more important." Something in the way he said it made color rise in Beatrice's cheeks despite the sunburn already there. She looked away, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture he found unexpectedly endearing. "We should head out," he said, more gruffly than he intended. "We can make it back to the ranch by nightfall. You can clean up and get a proper meal, and tomorrow I will take you to Jerome Junction." "I do not want to impose," Beatrice started, but Daniel cut her off. "You are not imposing. I am offering." He softened his tone. "Besides, it is not safe to travel at night, and I would not feel right leaving you alone here." "Then I accept gratefully," she said, giving him another one of those smiles that made his heart do strange things in his chest. They left the line shack as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, more like a painting than real life. Daniel helped Beatrice mount in front of him again, and she settled against him with less hesitation this time. He told himself it was just because she was tired that it did not mean anything, but he could not deny how good it felt to have her there. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as they rode. "You said you are the foreman, have been for 3 years now." "It is a big operation, about 5,000 head of cattle spread across 50,000 acres. The owner, Mr. Garrison, lives in Chicago most of the year and leaves the running to me. We have about 20 ranch hands year-round, more during spring branding and fall roundup." "That sounds like a lot of responsibility." "It keeps me busy," Daniel admitted. "I like the work, though. There is something honest about it. Cattle do not care about your past or what keeps you up at night. They just need food and water and someone to keep them safe from predators." "Do you really think it is possible to outrun your past?" Beatrice asked softly. "Or does it just follow you wherever you go?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I used to think I could outrun it. Now I think maybe the goal is not to outrun it, but to find a way to live with it, to build something new that matters more than what was lost." "That is a beautiful thought. I've had a lot of time to think out here." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the steady gait of the horse lulling them both into a peaceful state. Daniel found himself acutely aware of every point where Beatrice's body touched his. Her back against his chest, his arm around her waist, her hair tickling his chin when the wind blew. It had been so long since he had been this close to anyone, since he had allowed himself to feel anything beyond the day-to-day routine of survival and work. "There," he said as they crested a rise, and the ranch spread out before them in the valley below. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure painted white with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stood the bunkhouse, stables, barn, and various other outbuildings that made up the working heart of the operation. Lights were beginning to glow in windows as the day faded, and Daniel could see figures moving around doing evening chores. "It is beautiful," Beatrice breathed, and Daniel felt an unexpected surge of pride, as if she had complimented him personally instead of just the ranch. They rode down into the ranch yard as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Several of the hands looked up curiously as Daniel dismounted and helped Beatrice down, but he ignored their stares and guided her toward the main house. Cookie, the ranch cook and general mother hen to all the hands, came bustling out onto the porch, drawn by the commotion. "Daniel Quinn, what have you got there?" Cookie called out. She was a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were kind behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Found her lost on the prairie," Daniel explained. "Stage accident. She needs food, a bath, and a place to sleep for the night. Tomorrow I will take her to Jerome Junction." Cookie's expression shifted immediately from curiosity to concern. She hurried down the steps and took Beatrice's arm. "You poor dear. Come inside right now. Daniel, you get yourself cleaned up and come back for supper. I will take care of Miss Patterson," Beatrice supplied. "Beatrice Patterson. I cannot thank you enough for your kindness." "Nonsense. We take care of our own out here, and anyone Daniel brings to this door is one of our own." Cookie shot Daniel a meaningful look that he pretended not to see, then bustled Beatrice inside. Daniel watched them go, already missing the weight of Beatrice against him, the sound of her voice. He shook his head at his own foolishness and headed to the bunkhouse to wash up. The other hands were gathered there, and as soon as he walked in, the questions started flying. "Who is the girl, Quinn? Where did you find her? She is pretty. You going to court her?" Daniel silenced them with a look. "Her stagecoach overturned. She was lost. I am taking her to Jerome Junction tomorrow. That is all." "Sure it is," said Jack Donnelly, one of the younger hands, grinning. "You should have seen your face when you rode in with her. Looked like you found a treasure chest full of gold." "Mind your own business, Jack," Daniel said, but there was no real heat in his voice. He washed up quickly at the basin, changing into a clean shirt before heading back to the main house. His hands were sweating, and his heart was racing like he was about to face down armed bandits instead of just having dinner with a woman. He could not remember the last time he had felt this nervous. Cookie had set up a meal in the formal dining room, which almost never got used. The table could seat 12 easily, but she had set 2 places close together at one end. Beatrice was already there, and Daniel almost did not recognize her. She had bathed and changed into a simple calico dress that Cookie must have loaned her, and her dark hair was clean and twisted into a braid that hung over one shoulder. She looked up when he entered, and the smile she gave him made him forget how to breathe for a moment. "Hello," she said, and there was something shy in her voice that had not been there before, now that they were clean and civilized instead of just 2 desperate souls on the prairie. "You clean up nice," Daniel said, then wanted to kick himself for such an inelegant compliment. But Beatrice laughed, a sound like bells, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. "So do you. Though I must say the trail dust gave you a certain rugged charm." They sat down and Cookie served them a feast. Roast beef, potatoes, greens from the kitchen garden, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie for dessert. It was the kind of meal that got served when Mr. Garrison visited, and Daniel knew Cookie was making a statement, though he was not entirely sure what it was. As they ate, they talked more easily than Daniel would have thought possible. Beatrice told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her work as a seamstress, and her dreams of maybe one day opening her own dress shop. Daniel found himself sharing stories about ranch life, about the satisfaction of working with animals and land, about the way the prairie changed with the seasons. He even found himself talking a little about his childhood in Ohio, about his parents who had died of cholera when he was 16, about the younger sister he had lost to fever before the war. "We have both known loss," Beatrice said quietly, her hand reaching across the table to touch his. The contact sent electricity through him, made him want to turn his hand over and capture hers, hold on and never let go. "It seems to be the common condition of being human," Daniel replied. "But I am starting to think maybe the point is not just surviving the loss but finding something worth holding on to after." Their eyes met and held, and Daniel could see his own tangled feelings reflected in her green gaze: attraction, confusion, hope, fear. It was too fast, too sudden. They had known each other less than 12 hours, but something was happening between them, something that felt inevitable and terrifying in equal measure. Cookie chose that moment to bustle in with more coffee, breaking the spell. "You two need anything else?" she asked, her eyes twinkling knowingly. "No, thank you," Beatrice said, pulling her hand back and looking flustered. "Everything was delicious." "Well then, I have made up the guest room for you, Miss Patterson. Top of the stairs, second door on the right. There is fresh water in the pitcher and extra blankets if you need them." "You have been so kind," Beatrice said, standing. She looked at Daniel. "Thank you again for finding me. I do not want to think about what would have happened if you had not come along when you did." "I am glad I did," Daniel said simply. He wanted to say more, wanted to ask her to stay longer, wanted to beg her not to leave tomorrow, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just stood there watching as she said goodnight and headed upstairs, Cookie trailing behind her. Daniel walked outside and stood on the porch, staring up at the stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. The night was cool and quiet except for the usual sounds of the ranch settling in for sleep. Horses nickering in the stables, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the creak of windmill blades turning in the breeze. "You are in trouble, my friend," came a voice from the shadows. Jack Donnelly stepped into the light spilling from the windows, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "I do not know what you are talking about," Daniel said. "Sure you do. You have got that look, like you just got kicked in the head by a mule, but you are happy about it." Despite himself, Daniel smiled. "Is it that obvious? To anyone with eyes, yeah. So what are you going to do about it? Take her to Jerome Junction tomorrow, like I said. Help her find her cousin. Make sure she is settled safely, then come back here and get on with my life." "That is the stupidest plan I have ever heard, and I once watched Tommy Shaw try to rope a coyote while drunk." Daniel laughed, a real laugh that felt rusty from disuse. "What would you have me do? Ask a woman I just met to give up her plans and stay here with me? She has a life waiting for her in town, a position with her cousin. I am just a lonely cowboy with nothing to offer. You have this ranch, a good job, the respect of every man here. You have got integrity and kindness and courage. Any woman would be lucky to have you, Daniel Quinn, and if you cannot see that, then you are blinder than old Sherman after he got kicked by that Mustang last year." "It does not matter what I have if she does not want it," Daniel said quietly. "And why would she? She has been here less than a day. Tomorrow she will go to Jerome Junction and meet her cousin and start her new life, and in a week she will barely remember me." "You are wrong," Jack said. "I saw the way she looked at you at dinner. That girl is not going to forget you any more than you are going to forget her." Daniel wanted to believe him, wanted to hope, but hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable, made you care, made you hurt when things inevitably fell apart. He had learned that lesson the hard way and had spent the last 13 years building walls to make sure he never had to learn it again. But then he remembered the feel of Beatrice in his arms, the sound of her laugh, the way she had looked at him across the dinner table, and he thought maybe, just maybe, some things were worth the risk. He slept poorly that night, tossing and turning in his narrow bunk in the foreman's quarters, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch and thinking about the woman sleeping in the main house. When dawn broke, he was already up and dressed, heading to the stables to saddle 2 horses, his bay gelding and a gentle mare that would be suitable for Beatrice. Cookie had packed them provisions for the ride. Sandwiches, canteens of water, apples, and cookies still warm from the oven. She handed the saddlebag to Daniel with a significant look. "You be careful with that girl," she said. "And I do not just mean getting her safely to town. Cookie." "I mean it, Daniel. You have been alone too long, pushed everyone away. That girl is special, and if you let her slip through your fingers because you are too scared to try, you are going to regret it for the rest of your life. You sound like Jack. Jack is smarter than he looks. You should listen to him. Listen to me. Listen to your own heart for once instead of all those ghosts you carry around." Beatrice came out of the house then, wearing her original traveling dress that Cookie had cleaned and mended. She looked beautiful in the morning light, her hair pulled back in a simple style, her face no longer burned but gently sun-kissed. When she saw Daniel waiting with the horses, her face lit up in a way that made his heart stutter. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he lied. "Are you ready to ride?" "As ready as I will ever be. though I confess I am a little nervous. I have not ridden much." "This is Daisy," Daniel said, patting the mare's neck. "She is gentle as a lamb. You will be fine." He helped her mount, his hands on her waist, and felt that same jolt of awareness that came every time they touched. She settled into the saddle and gathered the reins, looking down at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I know you had no obligation to help me, but you did anyway. That says a lot about who you are." "Anyone would have done the same," Daniel said, but they both knew that was not true. The West was full of men who would have taken advantage of a woman alone and vulnerable. He mounted his own horse, and they set out, riding side by side toward the rising sun. The journey to Jerome Junction would take most of the day at an easy pace, and Daniel found himself hoping the horses would go slow. That time would stretch and expand, giving him more hours with Beatrice before he had to let her go. They rode through the morning, talking and laughing, sharing the food Cookie had packed, and Daniel felt something in his chest unclench for the first time in years. Around midday, they stopped to water the horses at a creek that cut through the prairie. While the animals drank, Daniel and Beatrice sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, the only tree for miles around. The heat was intense, but a breeze came up from the south, bringing some relief. "Can I ask you something?" Beatrice said, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "Of course." "When you found me yesterday, you said you understood about fresh starts. Do you really think it is possible to start over, to become someone new?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "I think we are always ourselves, no matter where we go or what we do. But I also think we can choose what parts of ourselves we want to build on and what parts we want to leave behind. The war made me hard and closed off. I chose to come out here and keep being that way because it felt safer than trying to open up again. But now—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish. "But now," Beatrice prompted gently, "but now I am wondering if I chose wrong, if maybe I have been hiding instead of healing." Beatrice turned to look at him fully, her green eyes serious. "I think you have been doing what you needed to survive. But survival and living are not the same thing. I should know. I have been doing it myself since my father died, just going through the motions, taking the path of least resistance. Coming west was the first real choice I made for myself in months, and even that was born more out of desperation than hope." "And now?" Daniel asked, unconsciously echoing her words from a moment before. "Now I am sitting by a creek in the middle of Nebraska with a man who saved my life, and I feel more alive than I have in years. More hopeful. More like maybe the future could be something good instead of something to just endure." The air between them felt charged, heavy with words unsaid. Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and she leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have not known you even 2 full days. I do not believe in love at first sight or destiny or any of that. But I believe in this, whatever this is between us. And I know that when I leave you in Jerome Junction today, it is going to hurt worse than anything I have felt since the war ended." She opened her eyes, and he could see they were bright with tears. "Then do not leave me there," she whispered. "Or if you must, then promise you will come back. Promise you will give this a chance, whatever this is. Your cousin is expecting you. You have a position waiting, a new life planned. Plans can change. Lives can change. I am starting to think maybe I ended up lost on that prairie for a reason. Maybe I needed to be lost so you could find me." Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to grab onto this chance with both hands and never let go, but the part of him that had been broken by war and loss was screaming warnings. "What if I am not enough?" he asked. What if I am too damaged, too closed off? What if I hurt you without meaning to? What if you are exactly enough? Beatrice countered. What if we are both exactly what we need? We will not know unless we try, Daniel, and I think we owe it to ourselves to try. He kissed her then, unable to stop himself, cupping her face in his hands and pressing his lips to hers. She kissed him back with a sweetness that undid him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss was gentle but desperate, full of promise and fear and hope all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I am terrified," he admitted. "So am I," she said, "but I am more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. What about your cousin, your position in town?" "I will still go to Jerome Junction. I will meet with Margaret and explain the situation. She will understand or she will not, but either way it is my choice to make, and I choose this. I choose you if you will have me." "If I will have you," Daniel laughed, a shaky sound. "Beatrice, I would be the luckiest man alive." They kissed again, slower this time, learning the shape and taste of each other. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had moved significantly across the sky and the horses were getting restless, ready to move on. They rode the rest of the way to Jerome Junction with a new energy between them, hands occasionally brushing as their horses walked side by side, glances loaded with meaning. Daniel pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area, about the town they were heading to, about the life they might build together if she was really serious about staying. Jerome Junction appeared on the horizon in late afternoon, a cluster of buildings that had grown up around the railway depot. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with businesses. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, a doctor's office, a blacksmith, a livery stable. People moved about their business, and the whole place hummed with the particular energy of a town on the edge of civilization, part settled and part wild. Daniel led them to the general store, a large building with Whitmore's Mercantile painted across the front in neat letters. He helped Beatrice dismount and they stood for a moment on the wooden sidewalk, suddenly awkward now that the moment of truth had arrived. "I will wait here," Daniel said. "Take as long as you need to talk to your cousin." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "This will not take long. I know what I want." She went inside and Daniel leaned against the hitching post, trying to look casual while his heart hammered in his chest. What if she changed her mind? What if her cousin talked her out of it? What if she realized that staying with him meant giving up the life she had planned, the security of a position in town for the uncertainty of ranch life with a man she barely knew? He did not have to wait long. The door opened, and Beatrice emerged with another woman who had to be Margaret, given the family resemblance. Margaret was older, maybe 30, with a kind face and intelligent eyes that assessed Daniel thoroughly in the space of a heartbeat. "So you are the cowboy who rescued my cousin," Margaret said, walking over to him. "Beatrice has been telling me quite a story." "I am just glad I found her when I did," Daniel said, straightening up. "The prairie is no place for someone unfamiliar with the territory. She also tells me you have asked her to stay with you at the ranch instead of taking the position I offered her here." Margaret's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Daniel shot Beatrice a look, but she just smiled encouragingly. He turned back to Margaret. "I know it seems sudden. I know it probably looks like I am taking advantage of her vulnerability. But I swear to you, my intentions are honorable. I care about your cousin more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time. If she chooses to stay with me, I will do everything in my power to make her happy and keep her safe." Margaret studied him for a long moment, and Daniel forced himself to hold her gaze, to let her see his sincerity. Finally, her expression softened and she smiled. My cousin is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions, and she seems quite decided about you. I admit I am disappointed to lose her help in the store, but I am more interested in her happiness than my convenience. If you hurt her, though, Cowboy, you will answer to me. Understood? Understood, Daniel said, feeling relief flood through him. There is one more thing, Margaret said. My husband and I would like to invite you both to dinner tonight at our home. It is above the store. I want to get to know the man my cousin is so taken with, and I suspect you two have some things to discuss about the future. Daniel looked at Beatrice, who nodded eagerly. We would be honored, he said. The dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Margaret's husband Thomas was a jovial man in his 40s, who regaled them with stories about establishing the mercantile and the various characters who passed through Jerome Junction. Margaret clearly adored him, and the love between them was evident in every look and touch. Daniel found himself hoping that he and Beatrice might achieve that kind of easy companionship given time. Over dessert, Margaret turned serious. Beatrice, I want you to be sure about this. Life on a ranch is hard work. It is isolated. You will be far from town, from the society you might have had here. Are you truly ready for that? I am, Beatrice said firmly. I did not come west looking for comfort, Margaret. I came looking for a life worth living. I think I have found it, or at least the beginning of it. And you, Mr. Quinn, what are your intentions toward my cousin? I will not see her cast aside when the novelty wears off. Daniel met Margaret's eyes squarely. My intentions are marriage if she will have me. I know it seems fast, but I am not a young man and I am not given to flights of fancy. When I know something is right, I trust that knowledge. Beatrice is right. I feel it in my bones. Beatrice's sharp intake of breath told him she had not been expecting such a direct declaration. Margaret, however, looked satisfied. Well then, she said, I suppose congratulations are in order. When should we expect a wedding? Daniel and Beatrice looked at each other. They had not actually discussed specifics, had been operating purely on feeling and hope up until this point. Soon, Daniel said. If you are willing, he added to Beatrice. I am willing, she said, her eyes shining. Very willing. They made plans over the next hour. Margaret insisted they marry in the church in Jerome Junction, with her and Thomas as witnesses. The preacher could perform the ceremony in 3 days, which would give time to secure a license and make basic preparations. It was fast, almost scandalously so, but this was the West and people understood that life moved differently out here. Opportunities appeared and disappeared like summer storms. You grabbed them when you could or you lived with regret. They stayed the night in the hotel, in separate rooms because Daniel was determined to do this properly. In the morning, they went to see the preacher, a thin man with kind eyes who asked them serious questions about their commitment to each other and to God. Satisfied with their answers, he agreed to perform the ceremony in 3 days as planned. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Daniel rode back to the ranch to inform Cookie and the hands of his impending marriage and to make arrangements for Beatrice's arrival. Cookie went into a frenzy of cleaning and preparation, determined that the main house should be perfect for the new Mrs. Quinn. The hands, to a man, congratulated Daniel with genuine warmth, and Jack Donnelly crowed that he had known it would happen. I did not know it would happen, Daniel protested. 2 days ago, I did not even know she existed. Love does not work on schedules, Jack said sagely, as if he had not spent the last 3 years nursing an unrequited crush on the saloon girl in Jerome Junction who barely knew he existed. Daniel used the time to also ride out to inform Mr. Garrison of his marriage by telegram. The response came back quickly. Congratulations and an offer to give them the use of the main house permanently if Daniel was amenable. The foreman's quarters would not be suitable for a married couple, and Garrison had no real use for such a large house when he visited so rarely. Daniel accepted gratefully, hardly able to believe his luck. Meanwhile, Beatrice spent the days with Margaret, being fitted for a proper dress for the wedding and discussing the practicalities of ranch life. Margaret gave her advice on everything from cooking for a large crew to dealing with the isolation, to the supplies she would need. She also took Beatrice to meet some of the other women in town, making sure she knew she would have a community to turn to when she needed support or just conversation. The night before the wedding, Daniel lay awake in the bunkhouse, listening to the familiar sounds and thinking about how drastically his life was about to change. 3 days ago, he had been a solitary man resigned to his loneliness, convinced it was what he deserved, what he wanted. Now he was hours away from marrying a woman he had known less than a week, and instead of feeling terrified, he felt at peace. It was as if some part of him that had been sleeping had woken up, and he could not imagine going back to the half-life he had been living before. The wedding took place at noon on a clear August day. The church was small but beautiful, with light streaming through the windows and wildflowers that Margaret had arranged on every surface. Daniel stood at the altar in his best suit, which he had not worn since he arrived in Nebraska, his hair slicked back and his boots polished until they shone. Jack Donnelly stood beside him as best man, looking uncomfortable in a proper shirt and vest instead of his usual work clothes. Then the door opened and Beatrice appeared on Thomas's arm, and Daniel forgot how to breathe. She wore a dress of pale blue silk that Margaret had altered to fit her perfectly, with her dark hair arranged in an elaborate style that left a few curls framing her face. She carried a bouquet of prairie flowers, and when she smiled at him, Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. She walked down the aisle toward him, and he thought about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. All the pain and loss and loneliness that had shaped them, all the choices that had led them to that exact spot on the prairie where their lives had intersected. It seemed impossible and inevitable all at once. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about the sanctity of marriage and the responsibilities they were undertaking. When it came time for vows, Daniel spoke as clearly and firmly, promising to love and cherish Beatrice, to protect and provide for her, to be faithful and true until death parted them. Beatrice's voice shook slightly as she made her own promises, but her eyes never left his, and the sincerity in them made his heart full to bursting. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Daniel cupped Beatrice's face gently and kissed her, a sweet kiss full of promise for all the kisses to come. The small congregation applauded, and when they broke apart, Beatrice was crying happy tears that Daniel wiped away with his thumbs. "Hello, Mrs. Quinn," he murmured. "Hello, husband," she replied, and they both laughed at the strangeness and rightness of those words. There was a small celebration at the hotel afterward, with food and cake and toasts to the happy couple. The ranch hands who had come to town for the occasion made increasingly ribald comments as the afternoon wore on, until Cookie shut them down with a single withering look. Margaret cried and hugged them both, making them promise to visit regularly. Thomas gave Daniel a bottle of good whiskey and some advice about marriage that boiled down to listen to your wife and apologize quickly. As evening approached, Daniel and Beatrice took their leave, riding back to the ranch together through the golden light of late summer. They rode slowly, in no particular hurry, savoring the moment. Beatrice rode Daisy, who had officially become her horse, while Daniel rode his bay gelding. Every so often their eyes would meet and they would smile, hardly able to believe what they had done. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked as the ranch came into view. "Happier than I knew was possible," Beatrice replied. "A week ago I was lost and alone and certain I was going to die. Now I am married to a good man and about to start a new life in a beautiful place. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I hope I never wake up," Daniel said. Cookie had outdone herself preparing the main house for their arrival. Every surface gleamed, fresh flowers stood in vases, and the bed in the master bedroom had been made up with the finest linens. She had also left a cold supper laid out for them in the dining room, and then tactfully disappeared to her own quarters in the back of the house, giving them privacy. That first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, full of discovery and gentle laughter as they learned each other's bodies and rhythms. Daniel was patient and careful, mindful that Beatrice was innocent, wanting her first experience of intimacy to be good. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, the windows open to let in the cool night breeze and the sounds of the prairie. "I love you," Beatrice whispered into the darkness. "I know it is too soon to say such things, that we barely know each other, but I do. I love you, Daniel Quinn." Daniel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since I saw you stumbling through that grass, so lost and so brave. You were fighting so hard to survive, refusing to give up. I admired that, admired you. We are rather ridiculous, are we not? Falling in love so quickly. Maybe. Or maybe we just recognized something in each other that we had been searching for without knowing it. Maybe some things are meant to be, and fighting them is the only ridiculous thing." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Daniel slept better than he had in years, with no nightmares or ghosts to haunt him. The next weeks fell into a rhythm as Beatrice adjusted to her new life as a ranch wife. It was hard work, harder than she had anticipated, but she faced it with the same determination she had shown walking through the prairie. She learned to cook for a crew of hungry ranch hands, to preserve food for winter, to manage a large household. Cookie taught her patiently, becoming both mentor and friend. Beatrice also learned to ride properly, and on her better days, she would ride out with Daniel as he checked fence lines and moved cattle. She learned the names of all the hands and took an interest in their lives, asking after their families and remembering details. The men, initially skeptical of having a woman around, came to adore her for her kindness and genuine care. Daniel had never been happier. Having Beatrice in his life was like having color return to the world after years of seeing everything in shades of gray. She drew him out, made him laugh, challenged him to be better. He found himself talking more, smiling more, opening up about his past in ways he never had before. The walls he had built around his heart crumbled under the steady pressure of her love. They also continued to learn each other in the privacy of their bedroom, their initial sweet discovery deepening into passion as Beatrice gained confidence, and Daniel learned what pleased her. Those nights were a revelation, a connection that went beyond mere physical satisfaction into something almost spiritual, a joining not just of bodies but of souls. As autumn arrived and the work of roundup began, Beatrice proved herself invaluable. She helped Cookie prepare massive meals for the extra hands hired for the season, tended injuries when men got hurt in the rough work, and kept the household running smoothly despite the increased demands. The hands respected her, not just as the boss's wife, but as someone who pulled her own weight. One evening in late October, after a long day of branding, Daniel came in to find Beatrice sitting in the parlor with an odd expression on her face. His heart jumped into his throat. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" "No," she said slowly. "Not ill. At least I do not think so." "Daniel, I think I might be pregnant." He stared at her for a moment, the words not quite making sense, and then joy crashed over him like a wave. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but all the signs are there. I thought perhaps we should see the doctor in town to confirm, but yes, I think so." Daniel set her down gently, his hands going immediately to her still flat stomach. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, sudden uncertainty crossing her face. "I know we have not discussed it much and it is rather soon," but he silenced her with a kiss. "I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic, terrified too, but in a good way. A baby, our baby." They made the trip to Jerome Junction the next week, and the doctor confirmed what Beatrice had suspected. She was about 2 months along, which meant the baby would arrive in late May or early June. The doctor pronounced her healthy and gave her instructions for care during the pregnancy, most of which boiled down to rest and good food and avoiding unnecessary stress. Winter settled over the prairie, and as the land slept under blankets of snow, Beatrice's belly began to swell with new life. Daniel became impossibly protective, constantly worrying that she was doing too much, working too hard. She bore his concern with patient amusement, insisting she was not made of glass and that pregnant women had been doing hard work since the dawn of time. Margaret visited in December, making the cold journey from town to check on her cousin and bring supplies they could not get at the ranch. She was delighted about the baby and brought yarn and needles so they could knit tiny clothes together by the fire during the long winter evenings. "You are happy," Margaret observed one afternoon while Daniel was out working. "Truly happy. I can see it in everything about you." "I am," Beatrice confirmed. "I know some people probably think I was foolish, marrying a virtual stranger and moving out to the middle of nowhere. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Daniel is everything I did not know I needed. He is kind and strong and gentle. He makes me feel safe and cherished. I love him more than I thought possible." "And he clearly adores you," Margaret said. "The way he looks at you, it is like you hung the moon. You are very lucky, both of you. I know. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life. A few months ago I was alone and afraid, and now I have a husband I love, a home, a baby on the way, and a sense of purpose I never had before. It is more than I ever dreamed of." Christmas came and went, a small celebration with just the ranch household since the snow made travel difficult. Daniel gave Beatrice a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog and a rocking chair he had made himself, his hands skilled with wood from years of ranch repairs. She gave him a warm coat she had sewn and a book of poetry she had sent away for, knowing he liked to read on winter evenings. As spring approached and the snow began to melt, Beatrice grew increasingly large and uncomfortable. The baby was active, keeping her up at night with kicks and movements that delighted Daniel when he could feel them under his hand. They spent hours discussing names and futures, imagining who their child would be. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" Beatrice asked one evening in late April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I do not care either way," Daniel said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth safely, that is all that matters. Though I suppose a boy might have an easier life out here. Or a girl who is strong and brave like her father. Gender does not determine character, Daniel." "You are right, as usual," he said, kissing her temple. "A child is a blessing regardless. I still cannot quite believe I am going to be a father. Me, of all people." "You will be a wonderful father," Beatrice said firmly. "You are patient and kind, and you know how to teach. Look how good you have been at teaching me about ranch life. Our child will be lucky to have you." The baby came on a warm evening in early June, arriving about 2 weeks earlier than expected. Daniel had ridden into town to fetch the doctor, but there was not time to wait. Cookie and Margaret, who had come to stay for the last month of the pregnancy, helped Beatrice through the labor in the big bedroom of the main house while Daniel paced holes in the floor downstairs, nearly out of his mind with worry. The hours stretched endlessly. Every cry from upstairs made him flinch, made him want to rush up there despite knowing he could do nothing to help. Jack stayed with him, providing silent support and occasionally forcing whiskey into his hands, which Daniel drank without tasting. Finally, as the sun was rising over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a different cry rang out. A baby's cry, strong and healthy and indignant. Daniel was up the stairs before he fully registered moving, bursting into the bedroom to find Cookie holding a tiny bundle wrapped in clean linen. "You have a son," Cookie said, tears streaming down her face. "A healthy baby boy." Daniel's eyes found Beatrice on the bed, exhausted and sweaty but smiling, more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to her side and taking her hand. "I am fine," she said, her voice tired but happy. "We have a son, Daniel, a perfect little boy." Cookie brought the baby over and placed him in Daniel's arms. He looked down at the tiny face, the unfocused eyes, the impossibly small fingers that were already trying to grip his thumb, and felt his world shift fundamentally on its axis. This was his son, his child. A piece of him and Beatrice combined into something entirely new and miraculous. "Hello," he whispered to the baby. "I am your father. I promise I will do my best by you. I promise I will teach you to be strong and kind. I promise I will love you and your mother for all my days." The baby made a soft sound, almost like he understood, and Daniel felt tears streak down his face for the first time since he was a boy. They named him David, after Daniel's father, with the middle name Thomas after Margaret's husband who had been so kind to them both. Little David was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. He became the center of their universe, this tiny person who depended on them for everything. Daniel took to fatherhood with unexpected ease. He was patient with the baby's crying, willing to walk the floors at night when David was fussy so Beatrice could rest. He sang to his son in a surprisingly good baritone, old songs from his childhood and lullabies he half remembered. Watching him with David, so gentle and devoted, made Beatrice fall even more deeply in love with her husband. The summer passed in a haze of sleepless nights and infinite wonder as they adjusted to being parents. The ranch hands took turns coming up to the house to meet the baby, these rough men turning surprisingly soft in the presence of the tiny infant. Jack Donnelly declared himself David's godfather without asking and took his self-appointed role seriously, bringing small gifts and taking a proprietary interest in the boy's welfare. As David grew and became more alert, more interactive, he brought joy not just to his parents but to everyone on the ranch. Cookie spoiled him shamelessly. Margaret visited as often as she could manage. Even Mr. Garrison made a special trip from Chicago to meet the first baby born on his ranch, bringing an extravagant silver rattle and a check that would ensure David's education when he was old enough. The first year of David's life flew by faster than Daniel could have imagined. Before he knew it, his son was taking his first steps, saying his first words, developing a personality that was uniquely his own. David was curious and fearless, already showing signs of the strength and determination he had inherited from both parents. On their first wedding anniversary, Daniel and Beatrice sat on the porch after putting David to bed, watching the sun set over the prairie just as they had so many times before. Beatrice leaned against Daniel's shoulder, his arm around her, and they sat in comfortable silence. "Can you believe it has only been a year?" Beatrice asked softly. "It feels like I have known you forever, like my life before meeting you happened to someone else." "I feel the same way," Daniel admitted. "Sometimes I try to remember what it was like before, when I was alone and convinced that was how it should be. But I cannot seem to hold onto that memory. It is like trying to remember a dream after waking. You and David are my reality now, the only reality that matters. You have any regrets? About how quickly everything happened, about giving up your solitude?" Daniel turned to look at her, making sure she could see the truth in his eyes. "Not a single one. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Quinn. You and our son. Finding you lost on that prairie was not chance. It was grace. It was God or fate or whatever you want to call it giving me a gift I did not deserve but will spend the rest of my life being grateful for." "I love you," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. What if something happened to you?" "What if nothing is going to happen?" Daniel said firmly. "I am not going anywhere. I am going to grow old with you, watch our son grow up, maybe give him some brothers and sisters if we are blessed. I am going to love you every single day for the rest of my life. And when we are old and gray, we will sit on this same porch and remember how it all started with you lost and me finding you, and how that one moment changed everything." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, the prairie settling into peaceful darkness around them. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise, and they faced it together. No longer lonely souls but partners, lovers, a family. The years rolled on with the steady rhythm of ranch life. David grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around the ranch like a small shadow. When he was 3, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her father's serious eyes and her mother's quick smile. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, named for the man who had been like an uncle to David and now was grandfather to all the Quinn children. The ranch prospered under Daniel's management. His reputation for honesty and fair dealing spread, and soon other ranchers were coming to him for advice. He trained several of the hands to take on more responsibility, creating a system that ran smoothly even when he needed to be away. But he was never away often or for long, because his family was his center, his purpose, his heart. Beatrice thrived in her role as wife and mother and unofficial ranch manager. She kept the books meticulously, handled correspondence with suppliers, and ran the household with an efficiency that amazed everyone who knew her. But she never lost the gentleness and kindness that had drawn Daniel to her in the first place. She was beloved by everyone who knew her, from the newest ranch hand to the women in Jerome Junction who had become her close friends. On evenings when work was done and the children were in bed, Daniel and Beatrice still found time to sit together on the porch, holding hands and watching the sun set over the prairie that had brought them together. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their days, their dreams, their concerns. The connection between them had only deepened with time, growing from that first spark of attraction into something solid and enduring. "You ever think about that day?" Beatrice asked one evening when David was 7, Sarah was 4, and Thomas was just learning to walk. "The day you found me, often," Daniel admitted. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had ridden a different direction that day, if I had checked different fence lines. Would someone else have found you? Would you have survived?" "I like to think I would have survived," Beatrice said. "I was pretty determined, but I am grateful every day that it was you who found me, that it was you who showed me what it means to be truly loved." Daniel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I was so lonely before you. I did not even realize how lonely until you filled up all those empty spaces. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day, maybe more." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the prairie and the occasional cry from inside where Thomas was fighting sleep. Their life was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, the thousand challenges that came with ranch life. But they faced it all together, and that made all the difference. As the children grew, Daniel made sure to teach them not just about ranching but about kindness, integrity, courage. He told them stories about the war, age-appropriate versions that emphasized the importance of standing up for what was right while never glorifying violence. He taught them to ride and rope, to read and think critically, to respect the land and the animals that depended on them. Beatrice taught them reading and arithmetic, music and art, manners and compassion. Between the two of them, their children were getting an education that rivaled anything they might receive in a fancy Eastern school, supplemented by books ordered from catalogs and occasional trips to Jerome Junction for formal schooling when the children were older. David showed early promise as a natural horseman and leader. He was protective of his younger siblings, patient with Sarah's constant questions and Thomas's tendency to get into everything. Sarah was bright and curious, always with her nose in a book when she was not helping her mother in the garden or kitchen. Thomas was the adventurous one, fearless to the point of giving his parents heart attacks, but so full of joy and laughter that it was impossible to stay angry with him for long. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Daniel eventually bought out Mr. Garrison when the older man decided to retire, becoming the full owner of the Triple Cross Ranch. It was a dream he had never dared to have, owning his own land, being his own master. But with Beatrice by his side and their children as motivation, he had worked hard and saved carefully. And when the opportunity came, he was ready. Cookie remained with them until she passed peacefully in her sleep one winter night when David was 10. Her loss hit the whole ranch hard, but especially Daniel and Beatrice, who had come to think of her as family. They buried her on a hill overlooking the prairie under a cottonwood tree with a headstone that read, "Friend, Counselor, Second Mother, forever in our hearts." Jack Donnelly finally worked up the courage to court the saloon girl he had been pining after for years, and to everyone's surprise, she accepted. They married, and Jack brought her to live on the ranch, where she proved to be an excellent addition to their extended family. Her name was Rose, and she and Beatrice became fast friends. Margaret and Thomas remained close, visiting several times a year and hosting the Quinn family in Jerome Junction whenever they needed to come to town. Their own children and the Quinn children grew up more like cousins than family friends, spending long summer days playing together and getting into the kind of mischief that only children raised with wide open spaces could devise. As Daniel moved through his 30s and into his 40s, he sometimes reflected on the bitter, lonely man he had been before finding Beatrice. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone he barely recognized. He had been so convinced that isolation was safety, that keeping people out would protect him from further pain. But he had learned that the opposite was true. Letting Beatrice in, building a life with her, creating their family together had not made him vulnerable to pain. It had made him strong. It had given him a reason to get up every morning, a purpose beyond just survival. The children grew and matured. David became a young man of 17, already as tall as his father, and showing every sign of one day running the ranch himself. He was serious and responsible, but with a dry sense of humor that could catch you off guard. He had his mother's compassion and his father's strength, a combination that would serve him well in life. Sarah, at 14, was beautiful and brilliant, with ambitions that extended beyond the prairie. She wanted to be a teacher, maybe even attend one of the new women's colleges in the East. Daniel and Beatrice encouraged her dreams, determined that their daughter would have every opportunity to build whatever life she wanted. Thomas, at 12, was still finding his way. He loved the ranch but also had a wanderlust that worried his parents sometimes. He talked about seeing the ocean, visiting big cities, experiencing the world beyond Nebraska. Daniel understood the impulse, remembered his own need to escape after the war, but he hoped Thomas would find a way to satisfy his curiosity without running from anything the way Daniel had. On their 20th anniversary, Daniel arranged for the children to stay with Jack and Rose for the night so he and Beatrice could have the house to themselves. They dressed in their finest clothes and had dinner by candlelight, just the two of them like they had not done in years. 20 years, Beatrice said, shaking her head in wonder. How is that possible? Where did the time go? Into 3 beautiful children and a life we built together, Daniel replied. I would not change a minute of it, not even the hard parts, the drought of '88. The winter Thomas almost died from pneumonia. The year the bank nearly foreclosed before the cattle prices recovered. Not even those, Daniel said firmly. Those hard times brought us closer together, taught us what we were capable of. I would not wish them on anyone, but I do not regret them either. They made us who we are. Beatrice reached across the table and took his hand. I was so lost when you found me, in more ways than just physically. I had no idea who I was or what I wanted from life. You gave me a place to discover that. You gave me the safety to become myself. You did the same for me, Daniel said. I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to love, how to hope. You are my heart, Beatrice. You always have been. From that first moment I saw you stumbling through the grass, so determined to survive. They moved to the porch after dinner, their favorite spot, and sat close together watching the stars come out. The prairie stretched around them, peaceful and eternal, witness to their love story that had started with a chance encounter and grew into something that would last lifetimes. You remember what you said to me that first night in the line shack? Beatrice asked. About building something new that matters more than what was lost. I remember. You were right. What we have built together, our family, our life, it matters more than anything I lost before, more than the life I might have had in Philadelphia or even in Jerome Junction. This is where I was meant to be, with you. Daniel kissed her soft and sweet, a kiss that held 20 years of love and trust and partnership. With you, he echoed, always with you. The years continued to pass. David took on more responsibility at the ranch, working side by side with his father, learning not just the practical skills, but the business acumen needed to run a successful operation. When he was 20, he began courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, a smart and capable girl named Emma who had grown up working cattle just like he had. Daniel and Beatrice approved heartily, seeing in Emma the same strength and determination that had drawn them to each other. Sarah did indeed go east to college, studying to be a teacher. It was hard having her so far away, but Daniel and Beatrice were proud of her ambition and determination. She wrote long letters home describing her studies, the friends she had made, the whole new world opening up to her. She promised to come back west after graduating, to teach in the rural schools that desperately needed qualified educators. Thomas, at 18, announced his intention to join a cattle drive heading north to Montana. He wanted to see more of the country before settling down to ranch work. Daniel understood, even if it scared him to think of his youngest child facing the dangers of the trail. He gave Thomas his blessing and his best horse, and made him promise to write regularly. With the children grown or nearly so, Daniel and Beatrice found themselves with time they had not had in years. They used it to strengthen their own relationship, taking rides across the prairie together, having long conversations, rediscovering each other without the constant demands of young children. "We did all right, did we not?" Beatrice said one afternoon as they rode together, checking on a herd in the south pasture. "Raising them, I mean." "Better than all right," Daniel said. "They are good people, kind and strong and capable. We should be proud." "I am proud. But I will miss having them all here, having the house full of noise and chaos." "We will have grandchildren soon enough," Daniel said, nodding toward where David and Emma were working together to move some cattle. "Those two are getting married next spring. I would not be surprised if we had a grandchild by this time next year." The prediction proved accurate. David and Emma married in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by family and friends from across the territory. By the following autumn, they welcomed a son, Daniel's first grandchild, who they named Daniel Quinn, Jr. Holding his grandson for the first time, seeing the next generation of his family, Daniel felt a profound sense of completion. Sarah did return after finishing her teaching degree, taking a position at the school in Jerome Junction. She boarded with Margaret and Thomas, who were slowing down but still running the mercantile. She loved the work, loved shaping young minds and giving children opportunities she knew they might not otherwise have. Thomas came home from his wandering after 2 years, leaner and harder, but with a light in his eyes that spoke of experiences that had shaped him into a man. He had stories to tell about Montana and Wyoming, about cattle drives and wild towns, about the country opening up and changing. But he had come home, and that was what mattered. He took his place working the ranch alongside his father and brother, completing the family circle once more. As Daniel moved into his 50s, his dark hair streaked with gray and his face lined from years in the sun, he found himself thinking often about that day 25 years ago when he had ridden out to check fence lines and found a woman lost on the prairie. How easily it might not have happened. How different his life would have been if he had ridden in a different direction, or if Beatrice had walked a different way. But it had happened. He had found her, or perhaps she had found him, and everything had changed. That lonely, bitter man he had been was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love and family and connection were not weaknesses but strengths. That opening yourself up to another person was not a risk to be avoided but an opportunity to be embraced. "You are thinking serious thoughts," Beatrice observed one evening. She was 50 now, her dark hair also threaded with silver, her face showing the marks of a life lived fully and well. To Daniel, she was more beautiful than the girl he had found on the prairie all those years ago. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "How close I came to missing all of this because I was too stubborn and scared to take a chance." "But you did take a chance. You took a chance on a strange woman you found lost and helpless. You could have just pointed me toward town and ridden away, but you did not. You stayed. You cared. You loved." "How could I not?" Daniel asked. "From that first moment I knew you were special. I knew you were going to change my life. I was just not sure if I was brave enough to let you." "But you were. You are. We both were brave enough to take a chance on what we felt even though it seemed crazy, and look what we got." Beatrice gestured at the house where their children and grandchildren were gathered for Sunday dinner, at the land spreading out around them, at the life they had built together through hard work and love and commitment. "Best decision I ever made," Daniel said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "Finding you, loving you, building this life with you. More years passed, bringing more grandchildren. Sarah married a rancher from the next county over and moved to his place, but visited often with her growing family. Thomas found love with a young woman who had come west as a mail-order bride but whose intended had died before she arrived. They had married quickly and happily, settling into the foreman's house that Daniel had fixed up for them on the north end of the property. David took over more and more of the day-to-day running of the ranch as Daniel slowed down, though Daniel still rode out most days, unable to imagine not being active in the land he loved. He and Beatrice spent their evenings surrounded by grandchildren, reading stories and teaching them the same lessons they had taught their own children. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw them a big party at the ranch. People came from all over the territory, friends they had made over the decades, business associates, neighbors, hands who had worked for them over the years. It was a celebration of not just their marriage, but of the life and community they had built. As Daniel stood on the porch looking out at the gathering, Beatrice came to stand beside him. "Quite a crowd," she observed. "Quite a life," Daniel replied. "And it all started with you lost on the prairie and me lonely enough to care." "We were both lost," Beatrice corrected gently. "Just in different ways. We found each other, and in finding each other, we found ourselves." "Poet," Daniel teased, but his voice was thick with emotion. "After 30 years with you, I have learned a thing or two about romance," Beatrice replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, watching their children and grandchildren, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love well shared. The prairie stretched around them unchanged and eternal, the same grass and sky that had witnessed their beginning now witnessed to their continuing. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Daniel thought about the story he would tell their grandchildren one day. About a lonely cowboy who found a lost woman on the prairie, who guided her home and in doing so found his own way out of the darkness. About how love could bloom in unexpected places, could heal old wounds and create new hope. About how taking a chance on someone, on something, could change everything. It was a good story, a true story. The best story he knew because it was his story, theirs, woven together out of desperation and hope and courage. And as he stood there with Beatrice in his arms and their family around them, Daniel Quinn knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man who ever lived. The years continued their steady march. Daniel's hair turned white, his hands grew gnarled from decades of hard work, but his mind remained sharp and his heart full. Beatrice aged gracefully beside him, her beauty deepening with time, her love for him never wavering. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive, each new generation a miracle and a blessing. The ranch remained in the family, passed down from father to son as was always intended. David ran it with the same integrity and care his father had taught him, and his own son was already learning the trade, ensuring the Quinn legacy would continue. The land prospered under their stewardship, a testament to the solid foundation Daniel and Beatrice had built all those years ago. As Daniel approached 70, he finally allowed himself to slow down more, spending his days on the porch or in the study, writing down the stories of his life so future generations would know where they came from. Beatrice sat beside him often, adding her own memories, correcting his account when his memory failed or embellished. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked her one quiet afternoon when they were alone. "Giving up the life you might have had in town, the easier life?" Beatrice looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Not for one single second. This life, this hard, beautiful, challenging life with you, has been worth every sacrifice, every difficult moment. I would choose it again in a heartbeat." "I love you," Daniel said, words he had spoken thousands of times over the years, but that never lost their power or meaning. "I love you too," Beatrice replied. "From that first moment on the prairie until my last breath, I will love you." They were blessed with good health well into their 70s, still active and engaged with their family and the ranch. But time eventually catches everyone. Daniel passed peacefully in his sleep at 76, Beatrice beside him as she had been for 50 years. His last words to her were, "Thank you for letting me find you." Beatrice grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, in the memories that sustained her. She lived another 4 years, dying at 74 surrounded by family, her last words a whisper of Daniel's name. They were buried together on the hill overlooking the prairie where they had spent their lives, under a cottonwood tree not far from Cookie's grave. The headstone read, "Daniel and Beatrice Quinn, two souls lost who found each other, together forever in love." Their story became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-great-grandchildren who never met them knew about the lonely cowboy who found the lost woman on the prairie, about how guiding her home had led him straight to love, about how that chance encounter had created a family legacy that endured. The ranch remained in Quinn hands for generations, and the main house where Daniel and Beatrice had raised their children always had a light burning in the window, welcoming all who needed it just as it had welcomed Beatrice that first night so long ago. The prairie remained unchanged, eternal witness to all the stories played out upon it. And on clear nights when the stars shone bright and the wind whispered through the grass, some said you could still feel the love between Daniel and Beatrice Quinn, a love that had transcended death and time, that had started with a desperate prayer and a willing heart, and that had created something beautiful and enduring and true. It was a love story for the ages, born in the harsh reality of the Old West, but blooming into something tender and lasting. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come when we are brave enough to help someone else, brave enough to open our hearts, brave enough to believe that love can heal all wounds and create new beginnings from the ashes of old endings. And so their story ended, but also continued, living on in every child and grandchild, in every lesson taught and value passed down, in the very land itself that they had loved and nurtured. Daniel and Beatrice Quinn had found each other against all odds, had built a life worth living, and had proved that true love, once found, lasts not just a lifetime but forever.